Music found me before I had time to understand why I had entered this bar at all. I opened the door, and the first chord struck me so strongly that my breath stopped. The hall was almost empty, a few glasses on tables, the waitress looking at her watch, and him, at the piano. His fingers slid across the keys with such ease, as if he played not for people but for silence. But the silence was listening. And so was I. I ordered whiskey without taking my eyes off him. When the glass was placed in front of me, I already knew that this would be a night without plans. His dark hair fell over his face, his shoulders moved in rhythm, and he looked as if the music flowed from him on its own. I sat and caught every note, feeling how something awakened in me, long forgotten. Everyone else had left, but I stayed. And it was not by chance. I took a sip, felt the bitterness spread through me with warmth, and looked directly at him. At that moment he raised his eyes. Our gazes met, and the world narrowed to the few meters between us. In his eyes there was no surprise, no question. Only calm recognition. He knew that I would stay. I did not look away. His fingers played another chord, and I smiled. Not for myself, not for him, for the moment that suddenly became a beginning. I was not looking for adventures, but the adventures had found me. And they carried his name, though I did not know it yet. The bar gradually emptied, and I no longer heard other voices. Only the faint clinking of dishes and his music. It unfolded in waves, sometimes rising, sometimes falling, but always returning to me. I looked at his hands, strong, confident, sliding across the keys as if they spoke not with the instrument but with the body. I took another sip of whiskey and felt how the fire spread inside, overlapping with this sound. It was a strange feeling, as if he touched me from afar, without coming closer, and still I felt every touch. He played without haste, letting the music lie on me layer by layer, and I gave in, though earlier I always tried to control every movement, every emotion. Now I did not want any control. He raised his head, and our gazes met again. I did not know how long that moment lasted, a second or an eternity. In his eyes I read something inexpressible, what words could not convey, recognition that I was already part of his melody. I smiled, a little confused, but sincerely. He answered with a barely noticeable tilt of his head, continuing to play, and I understood that now in this bar we remained only the two of us. The whiskey was ending, the waitress cleaned the tables, but for me the world had stopped. Every note was like a challenge, and I accepted it. This was not just music, it was acquaintance, more frank than any words. And when he played a long, drawn-out chord, I already knew, if I left now, I would lose something important. I took another sip and stayed. The light in the bar became warmer when the waitress dimmed a few lamps. The music now sounded as if the room was breathing with him. I moved the glass aside and stood up, making a few steps forward. Each of my movements echoed in the almost empty hall. He did not stop, his fingers still slid along the keys, but I felt that he was watching me. I sat down at a table almost next to the stage. From here I saw his face closer, a high forehead, concentrated eyes, the shadow of eyelashes on his cheeks. "Do you have a request?" he suddenly asked, not taking his eyes off the keys. His voice was slightly hoarse, low, but carried confidence. "Play as you wish," I answered, and it sounded like an invitation, even if I meant nothing but music. He nodded and played another melody. It was slow, deep, and every note sounded as if it touched my skin. I sat, holding my breath, feeling how my usual control melted. For the first time in a long while I did not think about how I looked, what I would say, or what others would think. There were no others. There were only us and this music, which became a common language. I raised my hand and touched the glass to hide the trembling of my fingers. But the trembling did not go away, it lived in me from every one of his chords. He played, and I imagined that his fingers touched not the keys, but me. And this imagination was so real that I felt warmth on my neck. He looked at me again, and I understood, this night already belonged to us both. The clock struck midnight, and that sound seemed to set a mark. Now we had crossed the boundary of an ordinary evening. The bar finally emptied, the waitress wiped the tables, preparing to close, but he did not stop. His fingers still stubbornly slid across the keys, as if the music held us in a trap. I sat close, and every note echoed in my body like a pulse. He played slower than before, and in it there was something intimate, like a conversation heard only by two. I caught myself thinking that my breathing synchronized with his melody, and my heart beat faster when he pressed the high notes. At one point he raised his head and spoke for the first time. "My name is Ezra," he said simply, without pathos. I felt how something inside me turned upside down from this name. It sounded like music, short, expressive, with a shade of mystery. "Alice," I answered, and when he repeated my name, it took on a new sound, deeper than any chord. In his voice was a soft intonation that made me tremble more than alcohol. Our eyes met, and for a moment it was so quiet that I heard my own breath. He played a few more notes, looking at me, and I understood. Now we officially knew each other's names, but this was not an ordinary acquaintance. It was something more, as if we had long been waiting for this moment. I felt that words no longer decided anything. Everything that mattered sounded in the music between us. And I was ready to listen to it until dawn. I stood up from my chair and took a few steps closer to the stage. My heart beat so loudly that it seemed the whole hall could hear it. Ezra raised his eyes and with a light gesture pointed to the chair nearby. "Sit down," he said simply, but in his voice there was such confidence that I could not object. I sat down beside him, and only a few centimeters remained between us. The smell of wood from the grand piano mixed with the aroma of his perfume, creating a new melody that intoxicated no less than whiskey. I watched how his fingers touched the keys, and felt that every one of their movements echoed in my body. I wanted to reach out and touch him, but I restrained myself. Finally I dared. My finger touched one key. The note sounded uncertain, almost funny, but he smiled. "So it's better," he said, and this phrase sounded as if he meant not only music. I felt how something in me opened, like a door that had long been locked. We played together, he led the melody, I sometimes pressed a key, and from this something greater than music was born. It was like the first touch, the first breath, the first step into the unknown. He looked at me from the side, and I caught his gaze. And it was an invitation, a promise, and something that made me tremble. I knew, between us something was about to happen that I both feared and longed for at the same time. And when his fingers accidentally touched mine, I realized, this night already belonged to us. His fingers slid across the keys a few more times, but now he was looking at me, not at the instrument. I felt how tension spread inside me, and it was like the expectation before the first kiss. He leaned a little closer, and I heard his breath. "You stayed as the last guest," he said quietly, and from these words chills ran over my skin. "Perhaps I was waiting for this music," I answered. His smile was barely noticeable, but it emphasized the seriousness of his gaze. The bar was almost empty, the waitress no longer paid attention to us, and I knew that in a moment we would remain completely alone. He played a few more notes, but the melody sounded fragmented, as if he no longer thought about the music. His hand slid closer to mine, and our fingers touched. The touch was light, but I felt as if something exploded inside me. I did not pull my hand away. We sat side by side, and this silence that came turned out to be louder than any melody. I looked at him and understood, we had crossed the boundary. And even if tomorrow everything would return to its places, tonight this night belonged to you. He stopped playing completely, and silence covered us like a blanket. His fingers still touched mine, and I felt the warmth coming from them. He leaned closer, and I did not turn away. Our lips met, and I suddenly realized that I no longer thought about rules or consequences. The kiss was warm and at the same time cautious, as if he was checking whether I really wanted this. I answered him, and he deepened the kiss, and my body responded immediately. It was a discovery that I both feared and waited for at the same time. The world around disappeared, only his lips and the smell of his skin remained. He moved away for a moment and looked into my eyes. "I knew that you would stay," he said. I laughed quietly, because in his words there was truth. I had stayed not because of the music, not by chance, but because of him. And I did not regret it. His hand embraced my waist, and I felt desired in a way that I had not felt for a long time. It was the beginning of something that I could not yet explain in words. But I knew, from this moment this night had no rules. We went out of the bar together, and the night city met us with cool air and the smell of rain. Lanterns cast golden light on the wet asphalt, and our steps spread with echo through the empty streets. He walked next to me, not letting go of my hand. It was natural, as if we had known each other for a long time. "Where are you going?" he asked when we stopped at the corner. I hesitated only for a moment, and then answered, "Where you will lead." His eyes shone from these words. We walked silently, but the silence was not a burden. It was a new language that we both understood. I felt how my heart beat quickly, but this fear was sweet. We came to his house, and he stopped. "You can leave now," he said quietly, but I did not want to go. I only nodded, and he opened the door. At that moment I knew, my world had changed completely. His apartment was small, but cozy. Books on shelves, sheet music on the floor, an old piano in the corner, all this created the feeling that I had entered a space where music ruled. He turned on a lamp, and the soft light fell on his face. I looked at him, and it seemed to me that he was completely different in his own space, more real, without a stage and spectators. He took off his jacket, threw it on a chair, and poured us both a glass of whiskey. "For a night without rules," he said, raising the glass. I touched his glass with mine and took a sip. The alcohol warmed me, but the real warmth came from him. We sat side by side on the couch, and his hand touched mine. This simple gesture made me tremble more strongly than any melody. I looked at him, and in his eyes I saw desire. He leaned closer, and our lips met again. This time the kiss was deeper, more passionate, and I felt that I lost control completely. And I liked to lose it. His hand slid along my back, embracing me as if he was afraid to let me go. I felt his warmth, his strength and tenderness at the same time. We laughed through kisses, because this lightness was so natural. He stood up and took me by the hand. "I want to show you my music closer," he said and led me to the piano. We sat next to each other, and he began to play. The melody was different than in the bar, softer, more intimate, almost a whisper. I sat, listened and looked at him, and every note seemed like a confession. He put my hand on the keys, and we played together. I laughed, because I did not know notes, but he led me, and it was like a dance. Our fingers intertwined, and in this there was more intimacy than in any words. When he stopped, we looked at each other in silence, and this silence said more than any music. I knew, this night was only beginning. His apartment was small, but it seemed like a separate world. In the corner stood a piano, covered with sheets and books, on the table, a few glasses, as if he often expected guests, but that evening everything was different. I felt that he had been waiting precisely for me. He took off his sweater and threw it onto a chair, moved freely, as if we had already known each other for a long time. And I stood near the door, hesitating, torn between my two halves, the one that always followed the rules, and the one that now trembled from anticipation. Ezra came closer, took my hand and led me into the room. His touch was warm and confident, and I did not resist. He poured whiskey into 2 glasses, handed me one. "For the night that continues," he said. I took a sip and felt how the alcohol mixed with the warmth in my chest. He sat down at the piano and played a few quiet notes. "This is for you," he said, and I realized that the music was now our common language. I came closer, feeling how each of his chords erased the boundaries I had built for years. His gaze met mine, and I knew, I no longer wanted to stop. He played a melody that seemed like a gentle conversation. I stood nearby and looked at his face, at his lips that moved slightly, as if he sang to himself. I put the glass aside and carefully touched his shoulder. He immediately raised his eyes, and the world seemed to stop. His hand covered mine, fingers slid along the skin, making me tremble. He stood up, and we were very close. I heard his breath, felt the warmth of his body, and there were no more doubts. Our lips met. The kiss was cautious at first, but every second it became deeper. I tangled my fingers in his hair, and the world melted in this touch. His hand slid along my waist, and I felt that I gave myself to this moment without reserve. It was passion born of silence and music, and it burned in me, igniting something new. I felt how my breath broke, how my heart beat so fast, as if trying to catch up with his rhythm. He moved back for a moment, looked into my eyes and said quietly, "I have been waiting for this." His voice was low, warm, and I believed every word. "Me too," I answered, and it was a confession that all my barriers had already fallen. He ran his fingers along my cheek, lowered them down to the collarbones, and I felt again the wave of warmth that covered me. In his hands I stopped being the teacher who followed rules. I was only a woman who allowed herself to live the moment. And this moment belonged only to us. His hands held me as if I were the dearest in the world. His embrace was warm and at the same time demanding. He left me no space for doubts, and I liked it. The kisses became deeper, more passionate, and I forgot everything that had been before. My body responded to every one of his movements, to every touch of lips, to every breath we shared. I felt how trembling spread inside me, and I no longer wanted to restrain it. His lips slid down my neck, and a quiet moan escaped my lips. He stopped for a moment and smiled, hearing it, as if it was the best music he had ever created. "You are beautiful," he whispered, and these words sounded so sincere that I felt how something opened inside me, like a door long closed. We fell onto the couch, laughing and kissing at the same time, our movements chaotic, but for that even more real. His fingers explored my skin, slid along my back, my waist, my hips, and I answered him the same, without thinking, without stopping. It was more than passion, it was release, freedom that I had avoided for so long. The world narrowed to us two, and I no longer heard the city nor my own thoughts. I was only a woman who allowed herself to be alive. I drowned in his kisses and understood, I wanted this night to last forever. We lay on the couch, our bodies intertwined, and I felt every one of his breaths, every movement. His fingers drew invisible patterns on my skin, slow and attentive, as if he tried to remember me by touch. I closed my eyes, giving myself to this tenderness, and felt his lips slide from my forehead to my collarbones. From this my breath broke, and I whispered his name. He stopped and looked into my eyes. "You can leave at any moment," he said seriously. In his voice there was no challenge, only respect, readiness to let go if I wanted. But I did not want to go. "I am staying," I answered, and these words became my decision, my choice without regret. I pulled him closer and kissed him, putting into this touch my entire answer. His body responded immediately, his hands became hotter, kisses deeper. We got lost in each other again, and every movement seemed full of meaning. It was not only desire, it was love without words, which unfolded in breaths and touches, in glances and light laughter that broke between kisses. I felt how my heart beat in unison with his, and this rhythm became our common music. Music that we created together that night, and which no one could take away. Dawn caught us together. I lay on his chest and listened to how his heart beat evenly. The room still smelled of music, whiskey, and our kisses, and on the table a candle was smoldering, which we had not extinguished. His hand slid along my hair, gently running through the strands, and this simple movement seemed like the most precious gift. I looked at him from below and saw how his eyes closed peacefully, as if he trusted me even in sleep. This trust was new for me. I had always built walls, and now I allowed myself to be so close to someone. "Do you not regret?" he asked quietly, when he woke up and saw that I was looking at him. I raised my head and looked into his eyes. "No," I answered, and it was the truth. I did not regret any moment of this night. He smiled, and this smile became for me another proof that everything happened rightly. Outside the window the world slowly woke up, the buzzing of cars, the cries of birds, the ringing laughter of passers-by could be heard. But inside the apartment reigned silence, and it was ours. I knew, my life would no longer be the same. I had opened a door into a world where love could be born accidentally, among music and silence. and now this love was my truth. I kissed him again, slowly, tenderly, so as to remember every second. And I understood, this was only the first page of our story, which still waited for continuation. The morning was unexpectedly quiet. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee he had made and looked at how the city woke up outside. People hurried about their business, cars honked, but all this seemed distant, as if it had nothing to do with me. I was here, in his apartment, and I felt that I had entered another world. Ezra sat at the piano and played something light, almost transparent, as if the dawn itself dictated the notes to him. I listened and caught every sound, feeling how the music filled me and made me calmer. In this melody there was something new, soft, almost intimate, and I realized, he was playing for me. "Do you like it?" he asked, not taking his eyes from the keys. "Very much," I answered, and it was true. I liked everything, his music, his voice, his silence, even this morning, which should have been ordinary but became special. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something that made my heart beat faster. It was not a coincidence, we both knew that this night had connected us. I took a sip of coffee, the hot bitterness mixed with sweet excitement. I thought about the fact that soon I would have to return to my duties, to lectures, to students, but inside me another music was already sounding. I wanted to stay here, next to him, and listen to how he played. My life had its own usual rhythm, but I realized, now it was changed forever. And I was ready to accept this change. I approached him when the melody faded. His fingers still lay on the keys but no longer moved. He sat leaning slightly forward and looked at me intently, as if waiting. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the warmth through the thin fabric of his shirt. He raised his eyes and took my palm in his, bent down and kissed the fingertips. From this simple touch something tender and unexpected blossomed inside me. "You look as if you don't believe what happened," he said. His voice was quiet, but in it there was confidence. "I really don't believe," I admitted. He smiled, lightly pulled me closer, and sat me on his lap. I felt his arms embrace my waist, felt my heart begin to beat faster, and I knew, I did not want to resist. His chest was warm and reliable, I leaned to him, allowing myself to be weak. This weakness did not frighten me, on the contrary, it brought relief. His lips found mine, the kiss was slow, gentle, and we both seemed to savor every second. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulled him closer, feeling how time dissolved. His fingers slid along my back, and this movement was so tender that I hardly held my breath. "Stay a little longer," he whispered, and I laid my head on his shoulder, feeling the rhythm of his heart. Even the silence between us sounded like a melody, and I knew, this moment would become one of the most important in my life. That moment could last forever, but my eyes accidentally fell on the clock on the wall. The hands moved relentlessly forward, reminding me that I was supposed to be at college an hour ago. A wave of reality came suddenly, and I jumped up, began to look for my bag. Ezra sat calmly, his gaze attentive, almost serious, and I felt, he did not want to let me go. "Do you need to leave?" he asked quietly. "Yes, I have lectures," I answered, trying to hide the sadness in my voice. He stood up and came closer to me, his palm lay on my cheek. The warmth of this touch made me freeze. "I don't want you to go," he said, and in his eyes I saw not only desire but also sincerity. I closed my eyes, inhaling his smell, feeling the warmth. "I don't want to either." "But I must," I whispered. His arms embraced me, and for a moment I drowned in this embrace, as if I wanted to take it with me. All my rules and duties seemed insignificant next to this feeling. I raised my head and looked into his eyes. "Will we see each other again?" His voice was almost hesitant, though outwardly he seemed confident. "Yes," I answered, and this time it was not a promise but certainty. Because I truly wanted it. I touched his lips with a short kiss and finally gathered my things. He walked me to the door, but his hand did not let go of mine for a long time. When I went outside, the air seemed colder, and the city met me with the noise of everyday life. But inside me lived the music I had heard that night, and it changed everything. The city met me with its usual noise. People hurried to work, students with coffee laughed near the bus stop, buses rattled, passers-by rushed somewhere. For everyone it was an ordinary day, for me, completely different. I walked through the corridors of the college, heard the bell, answered students' questions, checked their notes, but in my thoughts I remained there, in his apartment. I wrote dates on the board, explained difficult passages of literature, but before my eyes again and again appeared his hands on the keys, his smile, his eyes that looked only at me. I caught myself smiling without reason, and it was a strange, pleasant feeling. Several colleagues even asked what was with me, but I only waved it off. It was my secret, and it made me stronger, giving me light. Two worlds fought inside me, the teacher who always followed the rules, and the woman who gave herself to the musician without fear and hesitation. And now these two parts of me did not seem enemies. On the contrary, they complemented each other. I knew, that night had left a trace, and it would not disappear. I felt his touches even in the middle of the day, when students made noise around me. Inside me sounded a melody that only he heard and which I now carried in myself. For the first time in a long time I did not feel lonely. I knew, we would meet again, and this thought warmed me more than the sun outside the classroom window. All day I lived on the edge of reality and dream. I performed duties, answered questions, checked works, but inside me his melody sounded. It became my background, my hidden rhythm, and I did not want it to fade. When I finally returned home, the apartment seemed too quiet, too empty. I threw down my bag, took off my shoes, and fell onto the couch. I closed my eyes, and the memories came immediately, his hand sliding along my back, his lips searching for mine, his voice whispering my name. It was so vivid that I shuddered, as if he touched me again. I wanted to repeat everything once more, to immerse myself in that night completely. The phone lay nearby. I looked at it, and my heart beat faster. I wanted to write, but I restrained myself, afraid of seeming intrusive. Minutes dragged like hours. And then, at 7 in the evening, the screen lit up with his name. I froze, feeling how a wave of joy and excitement covered me at once. I answered almost immediately. "Are you free tonight?" His voice was confident and at the same time warm. "Yes," I said, without thinking. All my plans collapsed in one moment. "Then come," his laughter was heard. It sounded so light, so natural that I already saw myself walking down the familiar street to his house. "I will," I answered and hung up, but for a long time I still sat with the phone in my hands, feeling how the smile did not leave my face. The night began again, and I knew, it would again become ours. I stood in front of the mirror, trying to decide what to wear. It seemed strange to be nervous, because we had already lived through a night filled with so much closeness, but now it resembled a first date. I chose a simple black dress that emphasized my figure, and light earrings. I left my hair loose, he liked to touch the strands, and I wanted him to feel that moment again. My heart beat quickly when I left the house. The city was in the evening, in the air hung the smell of rain and hot asphalt. Each step brought me closer to him, and I caught myself thinking that I had not felt such excitement for a long time. His door opened before I had time to knock. He stood in the hallway, in a shirt with rolled-up sleeves, and his gaze made me tremble. "You came," he said quietly, but in his voice there was joy. "You invited," I answered, and we both smiled. He leaned in and kissed me before I had taken off my coat. His lips were warm, confident, and I felt that the world outside the door ceased to exist again. He pulled me closer, as if afraid to let go, and I answered him the same. In his embrace I knew, this was more than a casual meeting, more than a night without rules. This was a story that already belonged to both of us. His apartment greeted me with familiar coziness, scattered sheets near the piano, books on shelves, half darkness from a table lamp. I breathed in this space as if I had returned home. He took my hand and led me into the room, where an opened bottle of wine and 2 glasses already stood. "I thought tonight we would change the drink," he smiled, pouring wine. I sat on the couch, watching him, and felt how excitement gradually turned into calm. His presence acted on me soothingly and at the same time aroused. He gave me a glass, and we touched the rims. For repetitions that one wants again and again, he said. I smiled, feeling how the warmth of his words spread inside me. We talked about music, about books, even about my work. I was surprised how easy it was to open up to him, as if we had known each other for years. He listened attentively, asked questions, and I caught his gaze, in which there was no haste or indifference. Only interest and tenderness. When our conversation quieted, he put the glass on the table and leaned toward me. The kiss was slow, deep, more confident than the first time. His hand slid along my cheek, his fingers tangled in my hair, and I felt my body react immediately. The wine left a slight bitterness on my lips, and this taste mixed with his breath. We laughed and kissed at the same time, and this evening seemed like a continuation of that night, only even closer, even warmer. I knew I would stay here again. And this time, without any hesitation. We sat next to each other, and the silence between us was saturated, like music. His hand lay on mine, fingers from time to time slid along the skin, leaving a trace of warmth. I felt my breathing speed up, and I no longer tried to hide it. He looked at me with a long, attentive gaze, in which was more than any words. Then he put the glass on the table and pulled me closer. His lips found mine, and this time the kiss was full of passion, confident and hungry. I answered him the same, and a wave of desire covered me instantly. We fell on the couch, laughing and kissing at the same time, our bodies searched for each other. His hand slid along my side, along my back, and every movement was filled with tenderness and strength at the same time. I felt how my body responded to every touch, and I no longer thought of anything except him. His shirt quickly appeared on the floor, my dress followed. We were close as never before, and this moment seemed inevitable. He looked into my eyes even then when our bodies merged. And in this gaze there was something more than passion. There was a feeling that we were creating something new, important. I felt his breath on my skin, his heart that beat in unison with mine. Every movement was music that we wrote together without notes. In this symphony there was no place for fear or doubt. There was only us, and this moment, which I wanted to live again and again. The night embraced us again. We lay next to each other, breathed heavily, our bodies still trembled from what had been experienced. His hand covered mine, fingers intertwined so tightly as if he was afraid to let go. I felt the warmth of his skin and the quiet rhythm of his heart that echoed in his chest. Half darkness reigned in the room, the lamp on the table cast soft light on the wall, and outside the window rain drew its patterns on the glass. I listened to this tapping and thought, strange, how quickly the world had changed. Yesterday I was a teacher who did not believe in adventures, and today, a woman who gave herself to a musician and did not regret. Ezra turned to me, ran his fingers along my cheek. You are thinking too much again, he smiled. I laughed, leaned toward him and kissed him. His lips were soft, tender, and this kiss was no longer hungry, it was full of gratitude. We were silent, but this silence was full of meaning. I felt how something grew between us, more than night passion. It was closeness where no words were needed. He embraced me tighter, and I settled on his shoulder, listening to his breathing. Stay until morning, he said quietly, and I nodded. I could not even imagine that I would want otherwise. Outside the window the light of street lamps dissolved in the rain, and inside me shone a new feeling, peace I had not known before. I fell asleep next to him, for the first time in a long while, not fearing tomorrow. Dawn crept into the room through the translucent curtains. The light fell on his face, and I watched him sleep for a long time. His features were calm, relaxed, and in it there was something that touched me more than the most passionate kisses. I carefully ran my fingers along his cheek, afraid to wake him, but he opened his eyes and smiled, as if he had been waiting for it. Good morning, he whispered. Good, I answered, and this word sounded in a new way, like a real beginning. He pulled me closer, and we lay in each other's arms for a long time, not hurrying to speak. Outside the window the city lived its rhythm, trams rang, people hurried to work, but it had no meaning. We had our own time, our own space, where only the music of our breathing and beating hearts reigned. I knew, soon I would have to return to usual things, to lectures, to the role of teacher, but now I was different. In me lived the night that had changed everything, and this man, whose hands held me as if I were his only melody. What will happen next? I asked quietly. He looked at me attentively, seriously. Next we will write this story together. Day by day, note by note. His words sounded like a promise. I smiled and kissed him. I knew, whatever happened tomorrow, this meeting would remain forever. It had already become a memory that changes life, and a future into which I was ready to step. Because now I believed, in adventures, in love, in music that could unite two lonelinesses into one symphony.